the laughter echoing through the town hall of Columbus, New Mexico in 1885, felt like a physical blow to Cassandra Norton's heart. She stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, her honey-colored dress sewn with painstaking care over the last month, suddenly feeling like a spotlight on everything she'd tried to hide. The whispers and snickers from Beatrice Miller and her gaggle of friends cut through the fiddle music like knives. "Look at her trying to squeeze into that dress," Beatrice Stage whispered, twirling a perfect curl around her finger. "Some ladies just don't know their limitations." Cassandra's cheeks burned as she glanced down at her full figure. The curves she'd been self-conscious about since girlhood now the subject of cruel entertainment for half the town. The spring celebration dance was supposed to be her chance to finally feel part of the community after moving to Columbus 6 months ago to take over her late aunt's millinery shop. Instead, she felt like an outsider all over again. She turned to flee, dignity in tatters, when a firm hand caught her elbow. "Miss Norton, I believe this dance belongs to me." Jackson Blackett stood tall beside her, his broad-shouldered frame casting a protective shadow. His sun-bronzed face revealed nothing, but his eyes a striking shade of blue that reminded Cassandra of the vast New Mexico sky held a warmth that made her breath catch. "I don't recall promising you a dance, Mr. Blackett," she said quietly, aware of the stares now turning their way. "Then allow me to request one now." He offered his hand, calloused from ranch work but extended with unexpected gentleness. "Dance with me." Before she could protest further, he leaned closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Dance with me always, Miss Norton. Show them what they are too foolish to see." Something in his words, perhaps the conviction with which he spoke them, gave Cassandra the courage to place her trembling hand in his. As he led her to the center of the floor, the crowd parted like water around stones, and Cassandra felt the weight of every stare. Jackson Blackett had been a mystery since he'd arrived in Columbus 3 months prior. He'd purchased the struggling Rocking Bee Ranch outside town, kept mostly to himself, and rarely participated in town gatherings. What little Cassandra knew of him came from the town gossips that he was from somewhere back east, had money no one could account for, and that several eligible ladies had already set their caps for him without success. Yet here he was, taking the hand of the town's newest spinster in front of everyone. The musicians, momentarily distracted by the unexpected pair, resumed playing a waltz. Jackson's hand settled at her waist with respectful pressure, and he guided her into the dance with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Blackett," Cassandra whispered, her eyes fixed on the brass button of his vest rather than meet his gaze. "Good, because I'm not offering any." His voice was low and steady. "I'm offering a dance to the most interesting woman in the room. Those hens have nothing better to do than peck at others. Pay them no mind." Cassandra finally looked up, searching his face for insincerity but finding none. "Why would you call me interesting? You hardly know me." "I know enough." His lips quirked into a half-smile. "I know you took over your aunt's shop and turned it from a dusty hat store into the finest millinery this side of Santa Fe in less than 6 months. I know you walk to the schoolhouse every Wednesday to read to the children. And I know you're the only person in this town who doesn't stare at my scars when they think I'm not looking." Cassandra's eyes flickered briefly to the thin, white scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, so faint she'd hardly noticed it before. "Perhaps I was too busy worrying about my own perceived flaws to notice yours," she admitted. Jackson's smile deepened, creating crinkles around his eyes that transformed his serious face into something approachable, almost boyish. "Then perhaps we're well matched in our foolishness." As they continued to dance, Cassandra became aware of a strange sensation. The whispering and staring no longer seemed to matter. The weight of judgment that had pressed on her shoulders since childhood began to lift with each turn around the floor. "They're still watching us," she murmured as they swept past Beatrice and her group, whose expressions had shifted from mockery to confusion and, in some cases, thinly veiled envy. "Let them watch," Jackson replied, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. "Give them something worth seeing." With a confidence she didn't know she possessed, Cassandra straightened her back and lifted her chin. She allowed herself to smile, to feel the music, to enjoy the steady strength of this mysterious man who had, for reasons she couldn't fathom, chosen her. The waltz ended too soon, but before she could thank him and retreat to the safety of the punch table, Jackson kept hold of her hand. "Another?" he asked. Just as the musicians struck up a lively reel, Cassandra hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Another." They danced every dance that evening. By the final song, Cassandra's feet ached, her cheeks hurt from smiling, and the whispers around the room had taken on an entirely different tone. When Jackson finally escorted her to the refreshment table, he handed her a cup of punch with a formal bow that made her laugh. "I should thank you, Mr. Blackett." "Jackson," he corrected. "And no thanks are necessary. The pleasure was entirely mine." Cassandra sipped her punch, watching him over the rim of her cup. "All the same, what you did was kind." His expression suddenly grew serious. "It wasn't kindness, Miss Norton. I've been trying to work up the courage to speak to you since the first time I saw you in your shop. Tonight just gave me the push I needed." Stunned by his candor, Cassandra nearly choked on her punch. "Surely you're teasing me now." "I don't tease about matters of importance," he said, his gaze unwavering. "And I would very much like to call on you properly if you'd allow it." Before she could respond, Mayor Thompson called for everyone's attention to announce the end of the spring celebration. In the commotion of goodbyes and gathering belongings, Cassandra found herself swept toward the door with the crowd. Jackson appeared at her side as she stepped onto the boardwalk. "May I walk you home, Miss Norton?" The night air was cool, carrying the scent of desert sage after the stuffiness of the dance hall. Stars blazed overhead in a vast canopy, seeming close enough to touch in the clear desert sky. "Yes," she said, suddenly certain. "You may." As they walked the short distance to her home above the millinery shop, Cassandra felt a curious mix of nervousness and peace. Jackson Blackett was unlike any man she'd ever met, direct yet gentle, confident yet lacking the arrogance that often accompanied it. "You never answered my question," he said as they reached her door. "About calling on me." Cassandra turned to face him, her hand on the doorknob. "I would like that very much, Mr. Blackett." "Jackson," he reminded her softly. "Jackson," she repeated, testing the sound of his name. "And you must call me Cassandra." He nodded, his expression solemn, though his eyes held a spark of something that made her heart beat faster. "Good night then, Cassandra. Sleep well." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the moonlit street, and wondered what sort of story she had just stepped into and whether she was brave enough to see it through. The next morning, Cassandra woke to find Columbus buzzing with gossip about her unexpected dance partner. As she arranged a new display of spring bonnets in the shop window, she overheard two women on the boardwalk outside. "Can you believe it? Jackson Blackett dancing with that Norton woman all evening. Well, they do say he's peculiar. Living all alone out at that ranch, hardly speaking to anyone. Perhaps he prefers a woman with more to hold on to." Cassandra's hands froze on the hat she was arranging, her stomach tightening with familiar shame. "Or maybe," came a deep voice from behind the women, "he simply recognizes quality when he sees it." The women scattered like startled chickens as Jackson tipped his hat to them, then pushed open the door to Cassandra's shop. The bell above jangled merrily, seemingly at odds with the thundering of her heart. "Good morning," he greeted, removing his hat. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt under a brown vest. He looked every inch the prosperous rancher, save for a smudge of dirt on his jawline that spoke of morning chores. "You shouldn't have done that," Cassandra said, abandoning the window display to face him. "You'll only make the gossip worse. I've never much cared for gossip." He set a small package on the counter between them. "I brought you something." Cassandra eyed the brown paper parcel warily. "You needn't have. It's just a small token, please." She untied the string and folded back the paper to reveal a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Her fingers traced the embossed cover with reverence. "How did you know I enjoy poetry?" "I didn't. But I saw you reading beneath that cottonwood tree by the creek last Sunday, and you seemed so lost in whatever world the book took you to. I thought you might like to visit another." His confession held no pretense, just simple truth. "Thank you." She clutched the book to her chest. "It's a thoughtful gift." Jackson smiled, revealing a dimple in his left cheek she hadn't noticed before. "I promised myself I would do this properly. May I take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening?" The directness of his invitation startled her. In her experience, men circled and hedged, playing games of interest and disinterest, until a woman was left confused about their intentions. "I would be delighted," she answered, matching his directness with her own. 7 o'clock. 7 it is." After he left, Cassandra pressed the book to her heart, allowing herself a moment of girlish excitement before practicality reasserted itself. Whatever was happening between them, if anything truly was, would face the scrutiny of the entire town. She needed to prepare herself for that reality. Yet when 7 o'clock arrived the following evening, Cassandra found herself caring less about town opinions and more about the man waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs that led from her living quarters to the shop below. Jackson stood with hat in hand, his posture straight but not stiff. He wore a dark suit that looked new, his boots polished to a shine. The care he'd taken with his appearance wasn't lost on Cassandra, who had spent hours deciding on her own blue silk dress, one she'd made last year but rarely had occasion to wear. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." His smile reached his eyes. "My foreman's wife insisted on pressing this suit, said I couldn't take a lady to dinner looking like I'd just wrestled a steer." The mental image made Cassandra laugh, easing some of her nervousness. "Have you been wrestling many steers lately?" "More than I care to admit. The rocking bee needs a lot of work to make it profitable again." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The Columbus Hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented the height of local sophistication. White tablecloths, real glass windows, and a menu that offered more than just beans and beef made it the venue of choice for courting couples and special occasions. Heads turned as they entered, but Jackson guided her to a corner table with a confidence that seemed to dare anyone to comment. He held her chair and waited for her to be seated before taking his own place across from her. "People are staring," she whispered after the waiter had taken their order. "Let them," he replied, echoing his words from the dance. "They'll find something else to occupy their minds soon enough." "You're very unconcerned with what others think. Life's too short to live it according to others' expectations." Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain. "I learned that lesson the hard way." Cassandra leaned forward slightly. "Will you tell me about it someday?" "Someday," he promised. "But not tonight. Tonight I'd rather learn more about Cassandra Norton. How did a woman with your obvious education and refinement end up in a dusty border town like Columbus?" She traced the rim of her water glass, considering her answer. My father was a professor at a small college in Massachusetts. He believed his daughters should be as educated as his son, much to my mother's dismay. When they both died of influenza 5 years ago, my brother inherited the family home and I was left with enough money to either marry sensibly or make my own way. And you chose your own way. I did. I taught school for a while, but it never quite felt right. When I received word that my aunt had passed and left me her shop here, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. She smiled ruefully. Though I'm not sure I fully appreciated just how fresh it would be until I arrived and found myself in a place where the desert meets the mountains and proper Boston manners mean very little. Jackson's eyes crinkled with amusement. And now, do you regret your decision? Cassandra considered the question seriously. No. Despite everything, there's something about this place, the openness of the land, the way the sky goes on forever. It makes the problems that seemed so important back east feel smaller somehow. The West has a way of stripping things down to what truly matters, Jackson agreed. It's unforgiving to pretense. Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, touching on books they'd both read, places they'd seen, and the quirks of Columbus's residents. Jackson told her about his struggles to revitalize the rocking bee, his voice animated with plans for breeding better stock and introducing new farming methods. You speak of the ranch with such passion, Cassandra observed as they shared a slice of apple pie. Have you always wanted to be a rancher? A shadow crossed his face. No, I was a lawyer in Philadelphia. The ranch was an unexpected detour. She sensed there was much more to the story but didn't press. Instead, she shared her own dreams for expanding the millinery into a full dress shop, perhaps even bringing in fabrics from Mexico and designs from Europe. Columbus might not be ready for European fashion, she admitted with a laugh. You'd be surprised what people are ready for when shown the possibility. Jackson's gaze held hers across the table, and Cassandra felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant's temperature. After dinner, they walked through town in the gentle spring evening. The streets were quiet, most businesses closed, with only the saloon showing signs of lively activity. Jackson guided her away from the noise toward the edge of town, where the desert stretched out under a canopy of stars. I've never seen so many stars, Cassandra breathed, tilting her head back to take in the vastness. In Boston, the gas lamps and buildings hide most of them. It's one of the things I love most about this place, Jackson said softly. The night sky reminds me how small our troubles really are. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, though they weren't touching. Cassandra was acutely aware of the propriety of their situation alone at the edge of town after dark, but found she cared less about appearances than she once might have. Thank you for dinner, she said, turning to face him. I enjoyed myself more than I expected to. His smile was gentle in the moonlight. Did you expect to have a terrible time? No, she hesitated, then decided on honesty. I'm not used to being the center of someone's attention. Especially someone like you, someone like me, someone handsome and confident and, she faltered, embarrassed by her candor. Jackson stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Cassandra, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips, may I kiss you? The directness of his question stole her breath. She had been kissed before, awkward, fumbling encounters with boys back home that left her wondering what all the fuss was about. But standing beneath the vast New Mexican sky with Jackson Blackett looking at her as though she were the only woman in the world, Cassandra knew this would be different. Yes, she whispered. He cupped her face with gentle hands, his touch reverent as he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, her hands coming to rest on his chest, he deepened the kiss with a quiet intensity that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you. I'm glad you waited until now," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "It was worth the anticipation." He laughed softly, then took her hand to walk her home. At her door, he kissed her once more, briefly but with a promise that made her heart race. "May I see you again tomorrow?" he asked. "I close the shop at 5. I'll be here at 5:01. True to his word, Jackson appeared at her door the next evening and the next. Their courtship progressed with a straightforwardness that Cassandra found refreshing after years of navigating the subtle social codes of Boston society. Within a week, everyone in Columbus knew that Jackson Blackett was courting Cassandra Norton. The gossip reached new heights, theories ranging from the romantic, "he fell in love at first sight," to the practical, "she's a businesswoman, he needs a practical wife," to the downright cruel, "men like him settle for what they can get when they're ready to marry." Cassandra tried not to let the whispers bother her, focusing instead on the joy she found in Jackson's company. He took her riding across the rocking bee, showing her the improvements he'd made and the work still to be done. She taught him to bake her mother's apple tart recipe in the small kitchen above her shop. They read poetry aloud to each other on Sunday afternoons beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek. And with each passing day, Cassandra found herself falling deeper for this complex man with his quiet strength and unexpected tenderness. One evening, about a month after the spring celebration dance, Jackson arrived at her shop looking troubled. Cassandra had come to recognize the tightness around his eyes that meant something was weighing on him. "What's wrong?" she asked as soon as they were alone. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was wrestling with something difficult. "I received a letter today." From Philadelphia. Cassandra's heart constricted. In all their conversations, Jackson had revealed little about his past beyond vague references to a legal career and family troubles. She had respected his privacy, trusting he would share when ready. "Bad news," she prompted gently. "My father is ill, dying, according to my sister." His voice was flat, devoid of the emotion one might expect. "She's asking me to come home." "Oh, Jackson." She reached for his hand, squeezing it sympathetically. "Will you go?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had voiced. They hadn't spoken of the future, of commitments or promises, yet Cassandra felt the threat of his potential departure like a physical pain. "I don't know," he admitted. "My father and we parted on the worst possible terms. He disowned me, declared me dead to the family. Now Martha writes that he's asking for me on his deathbed." Cassandra guided him to sit on the small settee in her parlor, keeping his hand in hers. "Tell me," she said softly. "Tell me what happened." Jackson's gaze fixed on their joined hands. "My father was a federal judge in Philadelphia. The Blackett name meant something in legal circles. I was groomed from childhood to follow in his footsteps, the right schools, the right connections, the right marriage." He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "I was engaged to a woman named Eleanor Harrington, daughter of my father's closest friend from one of the oldest families in Philadelphia. It was practically arranged since we were children, though we were fond enough of each other. It seemed like the natural progression of things." Cassandra tried to ignore the jealous twist in her stomach at the thought of Jackson engaged to another woman, a proper Philadelphia lady with the right family name and connections. "What happened?" she asked. "I defended a man accused of murdering his wife. William Carr, an immigrant from Ireland. The evidence against him was circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst. But he was poor, Irish, and had a temper. Everyone, including my father, considered his guilt a foregone conclusion. Jackson's voice grew harder. I found evidence that the real killer was the victim's brother, a respected businessman with ties to city officials. When I presented this to my father, he told me to bury it. Said some things were more important than the truth, like maintaining public confidence in the justice system. You didn't bury it, Cassandra guessed. No, I couldn't live with myself if I had. His grip on her hand tightened. I presented my evidence in court. William Carr was acquitted. And my father? His voice broke slightly. My father denounced me publicly, said I disgraced the family name. Eleanor broke our engagement. Within a week, I was effectively blacklisted from every law practice in the city. So you came west. I wandered for a while. Took odd jobs, worked my way across the country. Ended up in Santa Fe, where I met Henry Martin. He was dying of consumption, had this failing ranch he needed to sell. I used the last of my inheritance to buy it, thinking I could build something honest with my own hands. Cassandra reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jaw. And this, a parting gift from Eleanor's brother. He and some friends caught me alone the night before I left Philadelphia, said they needed to teach me what happens to men who don't understand their place. The casual brutality of it made Cassandra's blood run cold. She leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to the scar, a gesture of acceptance that made Jackson's breath catch. You did the right thing, she said firmly. You stood for truth when it would have been easier to look away. It cost me everything, he said hoarsely. Not everything, she corrected. It led you here. The implications of her words hung between them, unspoken but understood. Jackson reached up to cup her face. Cassandra Norton, you are unlike any woman I've ever known. I'll take that as a compliment, she replied with a small smile. It was meant as one. His expression grew serious again. About my father. You should go, she said, though the words pained her. Not for him, but for yourself. Whatever he did, whatever happened between you, you'll carry the weight of unresolved things forever if you don't. Jackson studied her face. Would you? Would you wait for me? I know we haven't spoken of the future, but I can't bear the thought of losing you too. Cassandra's heart swelled with a mixture of joy and fear. How long would you be gone? A month, perhaps 2 at most. The railroad can get me there and back faster than was possible even a few years ago. She nodded, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Then yes, I'll wait. But Jackson, yes, come back to me. Whatever you find in Philadelphia, whatever happens with your father, promise you'll come back. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. I promise, he whispered against her hair. Nothing in this world could keep me from returning to you. 3 days later, Cassandra stood on the platform of the small Columbus train station, watching as Jackson prepared to board the eastbound train. He had settled his affairs at the Rocking Bee, leaving his capable foreman Miguel in charge during his absence. I'll write as often as I can, he promised, holding both her hands in his. And I'll be here when you return, she assured him, fighting back tears. It seemed ridiculous to feel so bereft at a temporary parting, but the past month had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The train whistle blew, signaling the final boarding call. Jackson reached into his pocket and pressed something into her palm. Keep this for me, he said. A promise that I'll return. Cassandra opened her hand to find a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. Jackson, I can't. It's not a proposal, not yet. His eyes held hers intently. But it is a promise. When I come back, if you'll have me, I intend to do this properly. Before she could respond, he kissed her a brief but fervent kiss that left her breathless and uncaring of the onlookers on the platform. Go, she said when they parted, giving him a gentle push. The sooner you leave, the sooner you can return. She watched the train until it disappeared from sight, the silver ring clutched tightly in her hand. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the fear that had been growing since he'd received the letter that Philadelphia, with all its civilization and refinement, might remind Jackson of everything he'd left behind. That he might compare her to the elegant Eleanor Harrington and find her wanting. He'll come back, she told herself firmly as she walked back to her shop. He promised. The first letter arrived a week later, detailing Jackson's journey and his apprehension about the reunion with his family. Cassandra wrote back immediately, pouring encouragement and affection onto the pages. A steady correspondence developed, their letters crossing paths as they traveled between New Mexico and Pennsylvania. In Columbus, life continued. Cassandra threw herself into her work, creating new designs and expanding her inventory with fabrics imported from Mexico. The summer heat settled over the town like a wool blanket, making the days long and torpid. Despite her busy schedule, Cassandra found herself often touching the silver ring which she wore on a chain around her neck. It became a talisman of sorts, a physical reminder of Jackson's promise to return. But as weeks stretched into a month, then 6 weeks, Cassandra's doubts began to grow. Jackson's letters remained consistent, but had taken on a distracted quality. He wrote of reconciliation with his sister Martha, of his father's lingering illness, of legal matters requiring his attention. "I'm needed here longer than anticipated," he wrote in his last letter. "Father's affairs are in disarray, and as the only son, the responsibility falls to me. I cannot say yet when I will return, but please know that my feelings remain unchanged." Cassandra read the letter until the paper grew soft at the creases, searching for hidden meanings between the lines. Was he preparing her for disappointment? Had Philadelphia reclaimed him after all? The doubts were made worse by the gossip that had resurged in Jackson's absence. Beatrice Miller and her friends took particular delight in speculating about Cassandra's situation. "He's probably reconnected with his Eastern sweetheart," Beatrice was overheard saying in the general store. "Men like Jackson Blackett don't seriously court women like Cassandra Norton. It was a frontier dalliance, nothing more." Normally, Cassandra would have dismissed such talk, but with each passing day without word of Jackson's return, her confidence wavered. The silver ring seemed to grow heavier around her neck, a reminder of promises that might not be kept. Then, on a sweltering August afternoon when Columbus seemed to shimmer beneath the merciless sun, the bell above Cassandra's shop door jangled. She looked up from her inventory ledger, expecting Mrs. Thornton coming to collect her new hat. Instead, Jackson Blackett stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright light outside. For a moment, Cassandra couldn't speak, couldn't move. He looked different, his clothes finer, his hair shorter, his posture somehow more formal. Her heart sank at the sight. He had become a Philadelphia gentleman again. "Cassandra," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. She rose slowly from behind the counter, her legs unsteady. "You're back." "I am." He stepped fully into the shop, letting the door close behind him. "I'm sorry I couldn't write with a definite date." Things were complicated. The formality between them felt wrong after the intimacy of their letters, yet Cassandra couldn't bridge the gap. "Your father passed 3 weeks ago." Jackson's expression was unreadable. "The funeral and settling of the estate took longer than expected." "I'm sorry for your loss," she said automatically, the social niceties of her Boston upbringing taking over when her heart didn't know what to say. "Are you?" His question wasn't accusatory, merely curious. "Sorry, I mean." Cassandra considered her answer carefully. "I'm sorry for any pain his passing caused you. I'm sorry you lost the chance to fully reconcile, but mostly, I'm sorry you had to face it all alone." Something in Jackson's face softened, the mask of Eastern propriety slipping. "I wasn't entirely alone. Your letters. They kept me grounded when I might have lost myself in that world again." He took a step toward her, then another, until he stood directly across the counter from her. "I've missed you, Cassandra, more than I can possibly express." The simple honesty in his words broke through her reserve. "I missed you too, so much that it frightened me." "Frightened you?" He reached for her hand and she allowed him to take it. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back, that Philadelphia would remind you of everything you'd left behind, that I would seem insufficient compared to the life you once had." Jackson's grip on her hand tightened. "Look at me, Cassandra." She raised her eyes to meet his, finding not the distant Philadelphia lawyer but her Jackson, the man who had asked her to dance when others mocked her, who read poetry with her beneath the cottonwood tree, who kissed her under the stars and promised to return. "Nothing in Philadelphia compares to what I have here with you," he said fiercely. "I went back a different man than the one who left. I faced my father, my sister, my past, and I found that none of it held power over me anymore. Do you know why?" Cassandra shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "Because I've found something real here, something true." His eyes burned with intensity. "I love you, Cassandra Norton. I think I've loved you since that first dance when you found the courage to hold your head high despite their cruelty." The declaration stole her breath. They had circled the words in their letters but never stated them directly. To hear them now spoken with such conviction made her heart soar. "I love you too," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I was so afraid you wouldn't come back to me." Jackson rounded the counter in 2 long strides, gathering her in his arms. "Nothing could have kept me away. Nothing." He kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of homecoming and promise and a future stretching out before them. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have something to ask you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Something I've been waiting to ask since the day I left." He stepped back slightly, still holding one of her hands, and dropped to one knee. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. "I promised when I returned that I would do this properly." He opened the box to reveal a gold ring set with a diamond surrounded by small sapphires. "Cassandra Norton, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Time seemed to stop as Cassandra looked down at this man who had changed everything. The answer was simple, had been simple from the moment he'd asked her to dance. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. "Yes, Jackson Blackett, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her again. The silver turquoise ring still hung around her neck, a testament to promises kept. "I want to show you something," he said when they finally broke apart. "Will you come with me?" Curious, Cassandra locked the shop and followed him to where a fine buggy waited outside. They drove out of town toward the Rocking Bee, but instead of turning down the familiar road to the ranch house, Jackson continued along the main road a little farther before turning onto a smaller track she hadn't noticed before. They rounded a bend, and Cassandra gasped. On a gentle rise overlooking both the ranch and the distant mountains stood a house, not a simple ranch house, but a proper 2-story home with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. "Jackson, what is this?" "Our home," he said simply, bringing the buggy to a stop. "If you like it." She turned to him in astonishment. "You built this?" "When?" "I gave the orders before I left for Philadelphia. My foreman Miguel oversaw the work. I wanted to surprise you when I returned." He looked suddenly uncertain. "If you don't like it, we can make changes, or live in town if you prefer." "I just thought," Cassandra silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. Absolutely perfect. Relief and joy washed over his features. Let me show you inside. The house was beautifully crafted with large windows to capture the views and let in the desert light. There was a proper parlor, a dining room, a study with built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen that would make any Eastern hostess envious. Upstairs, several bedrooms waited for future occupants. "This one would be ours," Jackson said, showing her the master bedroom with its adjoining dressing room and private bath luxuries, almost unheard of in this part of the territory. Cassandra wandered the rooms in amazement, touching the smooth wood of the banisters, running her fingers along the wallpaper Jackson had ordered from back east. "How did you manage all this? It must have cost a fortune." Jackson's expression grew solemn. "My father left me everything." It seems in his final days he had a change of heart. According to Martha, he regretted our estrangement and wanted to make amends. "And did you make amends?" We spoke before he died. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was enough. He asked my forgiveness and I gave it. Jackson took her hands in his. I returned to Philadelphia angry and bitter, still carrying the weight of his rejection. I'm coming back to you lighter with the past finally laid to rest. Cassandra squeezed his hands, understanding the significance of his words. "I'm so glad, Jackson, truly." "There's more," he said, leading her back downstairs and through French doors onto the rear porch. "Look there at the end of the garden." Cassandra followed his gaze to a small structure set apart from the main house, with large windows and a cheerful blue door. "What is it?" "Your dress shop." Jackson's eyes were bright with excitement. "I know how much you love your millinery, how you've dreamed of expanding it. This would be your space close to home but separate, a place for you to create and build your business." Tears sprang to Cassandra's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me, Cassandra." He turned her to face him. "I don't want you to give up your dreams to be my wife. I want us to build our dreams together." In that moment, standing on the porch of the home he had built for them, Cassandra knew with absolute certainty that she had found something most people search for all their lives and never find: a love based on respect, understanding, and genuine acceptance. "When can we marry?" she asked, practical considerations suddenly pressing. "There's the shop to think about, arrangements to be made." Jackson laughed, the sound of pure happiness. "Whenever you wish, my love. Tomorrow or next year, it makes no difference to me, as long as you're by my side at the end of it." Cassandra considered for a moment. 1 month, she decided. Long enough to make proper preparations, but not so long that we must wait unnecessarily. 1 month it is. He sealed the agreement with a kiss that held the promise of all their tomorrows. The news of their engagement spread through Columbus like wildfire. Reactions were mixed: genuine congratulations from those who had come to know and respect Cassandra, thinly veiled surprise from others who couldn't fathom what a man like Jackson Blackett saw in the full-figured milliner. Beatrice Miller and her circle were particularly venomous, their gossip turning to speculation about whether Cassandra had somehow trapped Jackson into marriage, but their whispers held less power now. Cassandra found herself immune to their barbs, secure in Jackson's love and her own worth. The wedding preparations consumed the next weeks. Cassandra created her own gown, an elegant creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that complemented her curves, rather than attempting to disguise them. Jackson insisted on sparing no expense, ordering flowers from as far away as California, and hiring the finest cook in the territory to prepare the wedding feast. On the evening before the wedding, Jackson hosted a dinner at the newly completed house for Cassandra and their closest friends Miguel and his wife Elena, Reverend Thomas and his wife, and a few others who had shown them kindness. After the meal, while the others enjoyed coffee and dessert on the porch, Jackson drew Cassandra aside. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "A wedding gift. I wanted to give it to you privately before tomorrow's festivities." Cassandra unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with her initials, or rather, what would be her initials after tomorrow. C&B. "Open it," Jackson urged softly. She did, finding the first page inscribed in Jackson's precise handwriting. "To my Cassandra, on the eve of our wedding, I give you this journal to record our story, a story that began with a dance and will continue for all the days of our lives. May these pages hold our joys, our triumphs, our challenges, and our love. Forever yours, Jackson. It's beautiful," she whispered, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I thought perhaps one day we might read it to our children," he said, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "So they would know how their parents found each other." The mention of children, their children, filled Cassandra with a warmth that spread through her entire being. "I would like that very much." Jackson took her hands in his expression growing serious. "There's something I need to tell you, Cassandra, something I should have said before now." A flicker of anxiety passed through her. "What is it?" "When I returned to Philadelphia, I learned that Alina, my former fiancée, had married a state senator. She attended my father's funeral with her husband and—" He hesitated, then continued. "She sought me out afterward, suggested that perhaps we had been hasty in ending our engagement, that her husband's position was not as satisfying as she'd hoped." Cassandra's heart constricted, but she kept her expression neutral. "And what did you say?" Jackson's laugh was short and incredulous. "I showed her your picture, the small photograph you had taken for me before I left. I told her about you, about our plans. I said I had found a woman of true substance and character, and that I considered myself the most fortunate of men." Relief and love washed over Cassandra in equal measure. "You did?" "Her face," Jackson said, shaking his head at the memory. She couldn't comprehend it. "In her world, a man of my position would only marry someone like you if there were no other options. She couldn't understand that I chose you, would choose you over anyone else in this world." He cupped her face in his hands. "I need you to know that, Cassandra. I need you to understand that you are not a consolation prize or a second choice. You are everything I never knew I was searching for until I found you." Tears spilled down Cassandra's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you, Jackson Blackett. And I love you, Cassandra Norton." Soon to be Cassandra Blackett. He kissed her softly, reverently. "Now, we should probably return to our guests before they send a search party." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September sky a perfect blue canopy over Columbus. Cassandra stood in the small room at the back of the church, her hands trembling slightly as Alina helped arrange her veil. "You are beautiful, Senora," Alina said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Senor Jackson will be speechless." Cassandra smoothed the silk of her gown, struck by how far she had come from that painful moment at the spring celebration dance. She had arrived in Columbus hoping for a quiet life of independence, never imagining she would find love with a man who saw her, truly saw her for all that she was. A knock at the door announced Reverend Thomas. "It's time, Miss Norton," he said with a kindly smile. With no family present, the Reverend had offered to escort her down the aisle. The small church was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the wedding, whether from genuine goodwill or simple curiosity. Cassandra took a deep breath as the music began, then stepped through the doors on Reverend Thomas's arm. The sight that greeted her stole her breath. Flowers adorned every pew and hung in garlands from the rafters. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests. and at the end of the aisle stood Jackson, his face transformed with wonder as he watched her approach. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the whispers, not the doubts, not the journey that had brought them here. There was only Jackson, waiting for her with love shining in his eyes. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, squeezing them gently in reassurance. "You are magnificent," he whispered, just for her ears. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. They exchanged the vows they had written together, promises not of obedience or servitude but of partnership, respect, and enduring love. When Jackson slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were as steady as his voice when he declared, "With this ring I thee wed." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas announced with evident pleasure. "You may kiss your bride." Jackson's kiss was tender yet possessive, a public declaration of their commitment. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Blackett, Cassandra caught sight of Beatrice Miller's sour expression in the third pew. Instead of the shame she might once have felt, Cassandra felt only compassion for a woman too blinded by convention to recognize love in its purest form. The reception at their new home lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up on the lawn, with lanterns hanging from the trees to provide light as the sun set. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts to the happy couple. As twilight deepened, Jackson led Cassandra to the center of the makeshift dance floor. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Blackett?" "You may have every dance, Mr. Blackett," she replied, stepping into his arms with the confidence of a woman who knew she was cherished. As they moved across the floor, Jackson leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Do you remember what I said to you that first night?" At the spring celebration, Cassandra smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "Dance with me always," she quoted. "That's what you said." "And I meant it," he told her, spinning her in a gentle turn. "Every day with you is a dance I never want to end." Later that night, after the guests had departed and they were finally alone in their new home, Jackson and Cassandra stood on the porch, looking out at the stars spanning the vast New Mexico sky. "Happy?" Jackson asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He turned her to face him, his expression serious yet tender. "Cassandra Blackett, I make you this promise every day of our lives together. I will strive to be worthy of your love. I will honor your dreams as my own. I will cherish every curve, every smile, every tear, every triumph. And I will dance with you always." Cassandra reached up to trace the scar along his jaw, the mark of a past that had led him to her. "And I promise to love you through whatever life brings us, to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to build our dreams together, and to never forget how precious is the gift we've found in each other." Their kiss beneath the stars sealed these private vows, promises more binding than those they had made before witnesses hours earlier. As Jackson swept her into his arms to carry her over the threshold of their bedroom, Cassandra knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their promises. The Rocking Bee prospered under Jackson's careful management, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Cassandra's dress shop flourished, her designs sought after by ladies as far away as Santa Fe and El Paso. Their home became known for its warmth and hospitality, a gathering place for friends and travelers alike. Their first child, a son they named James, arrived a year after their wedding, a robust, cheerful baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dimpled smile. He was followed 2 years later by twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, who kept the household in constant motion with their curious minds and adventurous spirits. Through it all, the sleepless nights with colicky babies, the drought that threatened the ranch in their third year of marriage, the economic downturn that temporarily affected Cassandra's business, their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Cassandra with a party at the Columbus Town Hall, the very place where their story had begun. The same musicians who had played at the spring celebration were hired for the occasion, and the hall was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. As they stood at the edge of the dance floor, Cassandra was struck by how much had changed. Many of the same townspeople who had once whispered behind her back now counted themselves fortunate to be in her social circle. Beatrice Miller had moved away after marrying a cattle buyer from Texas, her mockery forgotten by most. But the most profound change was within Cassandra herself. The woman who had once stood trembling with shame at the edge of this same floor now moved through the room with confidence, secure in her worth and in Jackson's love. When the musicians struck up a waltz, Jackson appeared at her side, just as he had that fateful night. "Miss Norton, I believe this dance belongs to me," he said, his eyes twinkling with shared memory. Cassandra laughed, taking his offered hand. "Always, Mr. Blackett, this dance and every other." As they swept across the floor, their movements in perfect harmony after years of dancing together, Cassandra caught sight of their reflection in the large mirror at the end of the hall. She saw not the flaws that had once preoccupied her, but the woman Jackson had always seen, strong, beautiful, worthy of love in all her fullness. "What are you thinking?" Jackson murmured, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how a single moment can change everything," she replied. "If you hadn't asked me to dance that night, I would have found another way to meet you," he said with absolute conviction. "Some things are meant to be, Cassandra. We are meant to be." As the music swelled around them, Cassandra rested her head on her husband's shoulder, grateful for the cruel whispers that had led to this moment, for the mockery that had brought her to the man who would teach her to see herself through his eyes, the man who had promised to dance with her always. And he had kept that promise, in ways both literal and figurative, through all the joys and challenges of building a life together. They had indeed danced always, through childbirth and drought, through prosperity and hardship, through quiet evenings by the fire and lively celebrations surrounded by friends. It was a dance that would continue for all their days, set to the music of a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a spring night in Columbus, New Mexico, a love that had transformed them both and created a legacy of acceptance, courage, and joy that would echo through generations to come.